Hi, friends. Today we're looking at the book of Ruth. Almost forgot. Ruth, part 1. And the year is 2024. And I'm your old pal, Papa Dale. And this is the Jan Hus Institute of Biblical Studies for the Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Literature degree program. Now, because there are always new viewers, I'm going to introduce myself briefly. I'm a retired pastor, teacher, theologian, and professor with over 50 years of service to the Lord Jesus Christ. My name is Dale Warren, and professionally I'm known in my writings, teachings, and lectures as D.A. Warren. But my friends just call me Papa Dale, so you can just call me Papa Dale. Now you can see the details of my personal testimony, family life, education, and ministry experience on other videos on this playlist. So for now, let's get right into today's topic, which is the Book of Ruth, part number 1. And so here we go. The Book of Ruth is a poignant and richly woven narrative offering profound insights into loyalty, love, and divine providence. Set during the turbulent period of the Judges in ancient Israel, the story centers around Ruth, a Moabite woman who defies cultural boundaries and exemplifies unwavering faithfulness. After the death of her husband, Ruth chooses to accompany her Israelite mother-in-law Naomi back to Bethlehem, embracing Naomi's people and ultimately their God. Through several various trials, including poverty and the challenges of gleaning in the fields, Ruth's determination and resilience shine brightly, and the encounter with Boaz, her kinsman redeemer, introduces themes of redemption, kinship, and the importance of community, highlighting how God orchestrates connections to fulfill his purposes. The narrative not only showcases the strength of women, but also emphasizes the significance of faith and loyalty across both ethnic and cultural divides. Ultimately, the Book of Ruth concludes with a genealogical lineage that leads to King David, underscoring the message that even amidst hardship, faith, and love hold the power to change destinies. This beautiful story invites readers to reflect on the transformative nature of relationships, the impact of kindness and integrity, and the overarching presence of divine grace in the lives of ordinary people. The authorship of the Book of Ruth is traditionally attributed to the prophet Samuel in Jewish tradition. However, some scholars suggest that it may have been written later during the time of the monarchy, possibly by a figure in the Davidic line, due to its focus on the lineage of David. The text itself does not explicitly name its author, leaving its authorship a matter of some speculation among scholars and theologians. Archaeological discoveries can provide insights into the setting and the time in which the events of Ruth may have occurred. Artifacts related to agriculture, daily life, and family structures during the time of the Judges, the period in which Ruth is set, illuminate the social backdrop of the narrative. This is material culture. Point number 2, inscriptions and documents. Ancient inscriptions and other texts give context to the legal and cultural practices mentioned in Ruth. For example, the concept of gleaning and family redemption, the role of the kinsman redeemer, are confirmed by ancient Near Eastern customs. And then there is historical context. Archaeological findings from sites associated with Naomi and Ruth's journey, such as Bethlehem and Moab, provide context for understanding the setting and cultural interactions in the story. Now, there's also historicity that attests to the validity of the book of Ruth. And it can be evaluated, the book of Ruth can be evaluated through both internal and external evidence. Internal evidence would include cultural practices. Ruth provides detailed descriptions of ancient Israelite customs, such as gleaning, Ruth 2, 2-3, Levirate marriage, Ruth 3, verse 9, and the role of the kinsman redeemer, Ruth 4, 1-10. These practices can be supported by other biblical texts and are consistent with what is known about ancient Israelite society. Point number 2, geographical references. The narratives mentions specific locations, such as Bethlehem and Moab, which can be correlated with archaeological sites. The precise way these locations are portrayed suggests familiarity with the geography and social dynamics of the time. There's also literary style. The narrative structure, character development, and poetic elements, such as in Ruth 1, 16-17, reflect a sophisticated literary style characteristic of historical narratives in the Hebrew Bible, indicating that it was crafted with careful attention to cultural authenticity. Point number 4, genealogy. The inclusion of genealogical details at the end of Ruth, chapter 4, verses 18-22, linking Ruth and Boaz to King David, suggests a historical motivation for the narrative, aiming to establish legitimacy for David's line. And then there is external evidence. Point 1 would be the historical background. The setting for the book of Ruth during the time of the Judges aligns with what is known from other historical sources about this chaotic period in Israel's history. The internal conflicts and societal issues faced by the Israelites during this time frame are echoed in Ruth's story. Point number 2, archaeological correlation. Excavations in regions like Bethlehem and Moab can provide context for the events described. While no specific artifacts have been found that directly relate to the figures of Ruth and Boaz, the general archaeological evidence supports the existence of the cultural and economic systems mentioned in the text. Point number 3, biblical context. Other books of the Bible, for example, 1 Samuel and the genealogies and chronicles, reference the same locations and cultural practices which can corroborate the historic reality presented in Ruth. Point number 4 would be ancient Near Eastern texts. Comparison with other ancient Near Eastern literature and laws provide a broader context for understanding the legal and social practices mentioned in Ruth. Now, this supports the idea that the book reflects real historical customs. While the book of Ruth's historicity may not be 100% verifiable to the same degree as some other historical texts, the combination of internal cultural consistency and external contextual support from the archaeological and historical record both contribute to its plausibility as a historical narrative. Well, what's the purpose for the books being written? Several. The first is the historical context. Ruth provides insight into life in ancient Israel during the time of the Judges, a period characterized by social turmoil and moral ambiguity. The book offers a glimpse into the everyday lives of people, particularly women, during this time frame, and highlights themes of loyalty, family, and societal norms. Point number 2, the theological reflection. The narrative emphasizes the themes of divine providence and redemption. Ruth's loyalty to Naomi and her willingness to embrace Naomi's people and God illustrate the concept of faithfulness and the inclusive nature of God's love. It showcases Yahweh's guidance in seemingly ordinary events, weaving a deeper theological understanding into the narrative. Point number 3, the celebration of loyalty and virtue. Ruth is portrayed as a model of loyalty, kindness, and industriousness. The book highlights her character, showcasing virtues such as commitment and selflessness, especially in her relationship with Naomi, and this serves as a moral exemplar for the audience. Point number 4, the establishment of David's lineage. One of the primary purposes of the book of Ruth is to demonstrate the heritage of King David. The genealogy at the end connects Ruth, a Moabitess, to the Israelite king, showing that Yahweh's plan for redemption and blessing extend beyond Israel's borders to include all people, emphasizing the universality of God's covenant. 1 Chronicles 2, 10 through 12, and Matthew 1, verse 5. Point number 5 is a call for inclusion. The story illustrates themes of inclusivity and acceptance as Ruth, a foreigner, becomes an integral part of the Israelite community. This reflects a broader message about belonging and Yahweh's grace towards all individuals, regardless of their background. Overall, the book of Ruth functions as both a historical narrative and a theological commentary, enriching the understanding of God's relationship with his people and illustrating the significance of faithfulness and redemption in human relationships. Well, what's the theme of the book of Ruth? There are several. The first theme we look at is loyalty and faithfulness. The relationship between Ruth and Naomi exemplifies unwavering loyalty and devotion. Ruth's commitment to stay with Naomi, even after the death of their husbands, highlights the importance of family bonds and support. Theme number 2, providence and divine guidance. The story of Ruth reflects the idea of Yahweh's providential care and guidance in the lives of individuals. Ruth's journey from Moab to Bethlehem, along with her eventual marriage to Boaz, illustrates how God works in the details of life to bring about his purposes. Theme number 3, inclusivity and acceptance. Ruth, a Moabite woman, becomes an integral part of Israelite community, symbolizing God's acceptance of outsiders. This theme emphasizes that faith and loyalty can transcend ethnic and cultural boundaries. Theme number 4, community and support. The role of community is significant in the book. The support that Naomi receives from Ruth and the welcoming nature of the Bethlehem community highlight the importance of communal relationships and collective care. Theme number 5, women's agency. The strong and proactive roles of Ruth and Naomi showcase the agency of women in the narrative. Their decisions and actions drive the plot and demonstrate their resourcefulness and strength in challenging circumstances. Theme number 6, love and kindness. In Hebrew, it's called chesed. The theme of loving kindness, or chesed, is evident in the interactions between the characters. Acts of kindness and loyalty shape their relationship and outcomes, reflecting the covenantal love that underpins the story. Theme number 7, redemption and restoration. The concept of redemption is central to Ruth's story, particularly through the figure of Boaz, who acts as the kinsman redeemer. This theme points to the possibility of restoration and new beginnings, both for individuals and families. In ancient Israel, a kinsman redeemer, in Hebrew the Goel, was a relative who had the responsibility to protect the rights and welfare of family members. This role was particularly significant in the context of family inheritance and social justice. The kinsman redeemer was called upon in several key situations. The first in the redeeming of land. If a family member fell into debt and had to sell their land, a kinsman redeemer had the right to buy back or redeem the land and keep it in the family. Also is the point of the Levirate marriage. If a man died without leaving a male heir, his brother or closest male relative was expected to marry the widow to produce offspring that would inherit the deceased brother's name and property. This practice was known as the Levirate marriage. And the third point is protection. The kinsman redeemer also had a role in avenging any wrongs done to family members, including acts of violence or injustice. The concept of kinsman redeemer emphasizes the importance of family loyalty, responsibility, and social justice within the community. Boaz acts as Ruth's kinsman redeemer, ultimately marrying her and ensuring the continuation of her deceased husband's lineage. The main characters in the book of Ruth include 1. Ruth, a Moabite woman and the central character of the story. She demonstrates loyalty, courage, and devotion, particularly in her commitment to her mother-in-law Naomi. Who, too, Naomi, is the second main character. She's Ruth's mother-in-law, originally from Bethlehem. After the deaths of her husband and 2 sons in Moab, she returns to Bethlehem. Naomi embodies the themes of loss, resilience, and guidance. Main character number 3 is Boaz. He's a wealthy relative of Naomi's late husband, and he becomes Ruth's kinsman redeemer. Boaz is portrayed as kind, generous, and just, ultimately marrying Ruth and ensuring her and Naomi's security. Also mentioned is Orpah. Orpah is Ruth's sister-in-law, who initially accompanies Naomi but ultimately decides to return to Moab. Her character highlights the choices between loyalty and the comfort of one's homeland. These characters play pivotal roles in the narrative, each contributing to the overarching themes of love, redemption, and divine providence. Now, the book has a specific structure, and unlike a lot of books, the structure of Ruth can be outlined by the 4 main chapters. Each has a distinct focus. Chapter 1, the focus is Naomi's return to Bethlehem. Setting the stage is the introduction of Naomi, her husband Elimelech, and their 2 sons, who moved to Moab due to a famine in Bethlehem. Tragedy strikes. Elimelech and his sons die, leaving Naomi with her 2 daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. And then there has to come a decision to return. Naomi decides to return to Bethlehem and urges her daughters-in-law to stay in their country of origin, which is Moab. Orpah does return to Moab, but Ruth pledges her loyalty to Naomi. In chapter 2, Ruth has her first encounter with Boaz, and Ruth takes initiative. She goes to glean in the fields to provide for herself and Naomi. Then, upon meeting Boaz, who is a relative of Naomi, Boaz notices Ruth's loyalty and hard work. And Boaz is a kind man. He ensures Ruth is protected and well provided for during her work gleaning in the fields. Chapter number 3 is the marriage proposal. Now, Naomi concocts a plan and instructs Ruth to seek Boaz's protection by proposing marriage. And this follows the customs of the Levirate or the Levirate marriage. Now, Ruth thinks that's a pretty good idea, and so Ruth approaches Boaz at the threshing floor at night, following Naomi's instructions. The threshing floor is where they were sleeping during the harvest period. And Boaz acknowledges Ruth's worth and agrees to marry her, but mentions that there might be a closer relative who has the first right. And so in chapter 4, we see the legal proceedings outworking. Boaz confronts the closer relative in town, who at first he says, okay, yeah, I'll marry her and I'll take possession of the property. But then after he thinks about it a little while, he realizes that this is going to dilute the inheritance that he gives to his own current children, and so he declines his right to redeem Ruth. And so what does Boaz do? Boaz says, okay, that's great. And he takes Ruth as his wife. And they conceive a child, ultimately, by the name of Obed. And then Obed becomes the grandfather of King David, highlighting God's providence and the inclusion of Ruth, who is a Moabite, into the lineage of David. And so Ruth is the great-grandmother of David. Now, this structure highlights the themes of loyalty, redemption, and divine providence while following Ruth's journey from widowhood to becoming an ancestor of David. These themes of loyalty, redemption, and divine protection echo throughout the entire lecture on the book of Ruth, because these are the important things that we find in the book of Ruth. So, what's the narrative like? What's the storyline like? In the days when the judges ruled Israel, a famine led Elimelech and his family to leave Bethlehem in search of sustenance. Now, this may have been the famine of Judges chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. God sent a judgment on the land of Israel in the form of a famine at that point in the narrative of the Judges. And so, with his wife Naomi and their 2 sons, Elimelech took his family and they settled in the land of Moab. Well, tragedy struck when Elimelech died, leaving Naomi to raise her sons alone. And so these sons married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth, but after about 10 years, both sons passed away also, leaving Naomi without her husband or her sons. Well, filled with grief and longing for her homeland, Naomi decides to return to Bethlehem upon hearing that the famine had ended. She urged her daughter-in-laws to stay in Moab and build new lives for themselves, since that was the land that they were born in. Now, Orpah ultimately did choose to stay, but Ruth clung to Naomi, declaring her unwavering loyalty with heartfelt pledge, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay." And with this commitment, the 2 women, Naomi and Ruth, journey back to Bethlehem together. Well, upon their arrival, the townspeople were astonished to see Naomi, who had returned empty and bitter. She was greeted warmly, yet she felt the weight of her loss deeply. To support the 2 of them, Ruth sought to glean in the fields, and this was a practice allowed under the law for the needy. and she happened upon the field of Boaz, a wealthy relative of Naomi's late husband. Just happened upon that particular field, huh? Wink, wink. Providence of God was at play here. Now Boaz noticed Ruth as she worked tirelessly, and he was captivated by her dedication to Naomi. And so Boaz approached Ruth, offering her protection and instructing his workers to leave extra grain for her. As Ruth filled her apron with barley, her heart swelled with gratitude at Boaz's kindness, and she shared the day's event with Naomi, who recognized Boaz could be their guardian redeemer. Well, guided by Naomi's wisdom, Ruth devised a plan to secure Boaz's protection and potentially his marriage commitment. So one night, while Boaz was sleeping on the threshing floor, Ruth approached him quietly and took the blanket off his feet, uncovered his feet, and lied down at his feet. Now, this was a symbolic gesture of seeking a marriage proposal in that culture. Awakened in surprise, Boaz praised Ruth for her loyalty and noble character, stating she could have chosen a much younger man, but instead chose him. Now, this moment is crucial in the narrative, as it signifies Ruth's boldness, her trust in God, and the instigation of redemptive action. Now, there are 4 reasons, maybe more than that. I don't know, 5 reasons. Okay. There are 5 reasons why this is so. Cultural context. Ruth's approach to Boaz at the threshing floor is laden with cultural significance. It reflects a custom of the time regarding Levirate marriage, where a relative could marry a widowed family member to preserve the family line, and Ruth's action is both daring and respectful. Cultural context. Point 2, risk and vulnerability. By going to Boaz at night and uncovering his feet, Ruth puts herself in a vulnerable position, demonstrating her faith and her desire for security and redemption for both her and Naomi. Boaz could have just blown her off and said, "No, get out of here." But that was not Boaz's response. Boaz's reaction is dramatic, and he is surprised and honored by Ruth's proposal, recognizing her loyalty to Naomi and the significance of her actions. He expresses a willingness to marry her, but also mentions that there is a closer relative who has the first right of redemption. And this adds tension to the situation. What's this other relative going to do? And so the moment, point number 4, the redemption theme, this moment highlights the central theme of redemption in the book of Ruth. It leads to a resolution for Ruth and Naomi's predicament, ultimately signifying God's providence and care for his people. Point number 5, the lineage and the legacy of this cultural context. The event culminates in the establishment of Ruth and Boaz's marriage, which eventually leads to the birth of Obed, the grandfather of King David. This connection to the lineage of David and ultimately Jesus emphasizes the dramatic and redemptive scope of the narrative. Overall, this event showcases not only the personal sacrifice and determination of Ruth, but also God's faithfulness in bringing about redemption through ordinary lives, making it one of the most dramatic and pivotal moments in the book of Ruth. Now, Boaz is eager to marry Ruth, but he informs her that there was another relative who had the right to redeem her before him. And so the next day Boaz went to the town gate which is where formal business was conducted in that day. He called upon the closer relative to discuss the land that Naomi sought to sell and the implications of marrying Ruth. When the relative learned of the marriage, and he considered it carefully, he declined, unwilling to jeopardize his own inheritance. With the other relative's refusal, Boaz redeems both Naomi's land and Ruth, taking her as his wife. Their union was blessed, and Ruth bore a son named Obed, whom Naomi embraced with joy. The women of the town celebrated Ruth's fertility, declaring her worthiness and acknowledging that Boaz was a redeemer to Naomi. In time, Obed grew to be the grandfather of King David, intertwining Ruth's story with the heritage of Israel. The book of Ruth concludes not just with a tale of loyalty and love, but also with a profound reminder of divine providence, illustrating how Ruth, a Moabite woman, became an integral part of the lineage leading to David and ultimately to the promised Messiah. See 1 Chronicles 2:10-12 and Matthew 1:5. Now, this has been your host, your old pal, Papa Dale. Pardon me. Pardon me. And the year is 2024. The lecture you just watched is the Book of Ruth, Part 1 of 3. Greater insights leading to deeper relationship with Jesus await you, so keep going. But please remember to read the printed notes and look up the scripture citations if you're studying for the degree, the Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Literature. You can find the notes in the video transcripts or at the link below. And so, until the next time I see you, this is your old pal Papa Dale, signing off for now and saying, I'm going to be praying for you, that you will be well, and that you will be blessed.